Welcome to LCRL's Liberty Alert in Washington, D.C. with your host, Dr. Gregory Seltz. Talking two kingdom citizenship, bold biblical principles for a robust public Christian life. And now, your host, Dr. Gregory Seltz.
Hello and welcome to LCRL's Liberty Alert. It is Wednesday, February 3rd, here in Washington, D.C. I'm Dr. Gregory Seltz, the Executive Director of the LCRL, and we're coming at you again. These next several Liberty Alerts, we're going to be talking about rebuilding. We have a responsibility, obviously, to preach and teach the good news of the gospel, because that's the saving message that we have as a church, unique to the church, by the way. But we also, as one of the ways we engage the culture for the sake of the gospel, is to preach and teach God's law, especially God's moral ordering of the world. It doesn't save us, but it preserves the world and it calls the world to repentance. And so we've got to be willing to be that voice, because that voice is always in service to the gospel. This week, we're going to talk about a movement that has done that very well, especially since 1973. It's the pro-life movement, the Sanctity of Life movement. And that message is vital now more than ever for everyone, not just for us as Christians. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The pro-life message is the positive, life-affirming message that can truly bond all people together. So that's one of the reasons. It really is the thing that can unite us. The pro-life message is pro-person, pro-family, pro-woman, pro-science, pro-community, and of course, biblical. And there are many strategies to speak the truth. We're going to talk about this today, but the truth of the sanctity of life is the truth. So God's people need to be courageous about this. And so it is a message that has historically overcome obstacles, especially bad law, to persuade even secular people today, too. So it's a message worth sharing. Again, we're coming to you live from Washington, D.C., well, recorded live to tape from Washington, D.C., and definitely really appreciate those of you who have joined us in this battle. You can go to our webpage, lcrlfreedom.org, lcrlfreedom.org. You can see all the past videos and now the ongoing podcasts that we're going to be doing. And especially there, if you're compelled, if you're moved, please you can donate online, and of course those things go to our sustainability here in Washington as your voice. So thanks for listening. We try to come each week to talk about why being a Christian two-kingdom citizen is a robust Christian life for the sake of the culture. So today, the role of the church in this cancel culture, in this even anti-life now cultural movement in our time. The new administration is definitely not pro-life. And so today we're going to talk about how we can be the church in the middle of that. Now, just before we get into kind of the situation, I just want to reflect on the fact that last week we had an event called the March for Life. And while we were, not able to march like we usually do, there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people that gather always peacefully here, protesting the heinousness of the 1973 ruling that made it legal to kill kids in the mother's womb. That march did not happen physically the way it usually does, but it happened virtually, and it was a great success. So you can go on our Facebook page and you can see that video, and you can watch the 2.5 hours of that. It was a blend of both the march and it was a blend of the Rose Dinner, which I got to speak at a couple years ago. I actually followed Vice President Mike Pence. So he came and spoke to our dinner, and I was the one who got to speak right after him. So it was really quite a privilege. And again, for those of you who, what's your view of the Trump administration? That was the first administration that participated in the March for Life. Now, think of all the presidents who were pro-life before, and they never participated. Gosh, I don't know what to say about that, but he did, and especially Pence and his wife came and they were just a tremendous boost to the people who marched that day. So the pro-life movement, it has faced down a lot of challenges over the years, and one of the things that we're going to have to be prepared for, and I don't understand why people can't see this in our church. We're going to have to be prepared for the fact that whenever these things get presented to us, the kinds of issues, like very often you don't see anything about the pro-life movement on the news. Nothing. And it's hundreds of thousands of people gathered and then marching from, the lawn here in between the Capitol and the monuments. And we march from there all the way to the Supreme Court. And again, just to see that in the singing and the prayers and the speeches and all those different things, and to not have it covered, and then to have it covered as an anti-abortion movement, it is so much more than that. So the first thing I got to tell you is going forward, we're going to have to get used to the fact that our positions on things, which I think are unifying positions, they're godly positions, they're virtuous positions, they're sociologically and psychologically healthy positions, they're not going to be portrayed that way. They're going to be called all kinds of names because they are standing against what I call the secular progressive move in our culture at this point. And the only thing that can push back against this kind of statist move is the church and free people. And you're going to see the power of government sometimes for all the wrong reasons. I hope and pray that we can push back successfully on that. But you're going to see our position caricatured. You're going to see the other position almost PR'd, almost marketed to us. They won't ever talk about the negative aspects of that. They won't ever talk about the destructive aspects of that, or the fact that it doesn't yield the kind of results that are promised. They'll always market that and continue to market that, and then when you hear about our position, it'll be caricatured. And that's what you're going to see on the evening news. That's what you're going to see in most of the major newspapers. You'll see that kind of coverage in the Times. It'll always be an anti-abortion movement, and it'll always sound nefarious, when in reality it's one of the most positive movements in the country. So bad law precipitated the march many years ago, and caricatures have been its challenge every year, and it has overcome that. And I think there's a thing out today, a poll. Well, I'll get to that in just a minute. But the pro-life movement is changing a lot of people's hearts and minds because we're relentless in our positive message, and that's what we need. If we're going to start to address culture, it can't just be the pushback stuff. We have to talk about the relentless positive message that we have to share too. So I think, that's one of the things we need to learn from the pro-life movement. It's faced down all the challenges and it's winning. And we need to learn why. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So it's pro-life movement's positive, life-affirming. It's pro-person, pro-family, pro-woman, pro-science. Let's talk about that today. The first thing is we got to set the stage. What's the milieu in which we are living at the moment? Well, again, like I said, just to be very clear, this administration is radically pro-abortion. And they're going to try to overturn a lot of the gains that were made in the last 4 years, but the gains that have been made over the last 40 years. There's a lot of things that have been going well as we've been moving to change the hearts and minds of people. But, right off the bat, President Biden ordered a review of the Title X restrictions, which will, if they're reviewed and changed, they'll lead directly to American tax dollars going to programs in which organizations perform or refer for abortions. And again, I don't care what your position on abortion is. If you're going to do this and say it's legal, you shouldn't be asking other people to pay for it. That's just common sense. And yet the very first thing they're going to do is they're going to overturn some of these Title 10 restrictions, and you're going to see foreign countries now. We're going to export abortion to foreign countries. You know, the Mexico City policy would be overturned, and you're going to start to see funding to Planned Parenthood again. And there's no reason. And for people who say that Planned Parenthood does other things besides abortion, you're wrong. It doesn't. It is in the abortion business, and it's got billions of dollars at its disposal. It doesn't need taxpayer money. So that's the first thing, and that's going to be the kind of administrative milieu we're going to be functioning under. I was just in a meeting tonight, and we were talking about, or they were talking about the behind the scenes things that happen for every March for Life every year. And one of the things they talked about was the last couple of years is actually having the executive branch participate, and how much that added all kinds of challenges, good challenges, by the way, but added all kinds. And they said, well, sadly, we won't have to worry about that for the next 4 years. And that really is sad. And then I just saw this, policy stuff on the Hill. U.S. Representative Sean Casten, Democrat from Illinois, signed on with the Secular Democrats of America, and they are pushing for President Biden to come down on conservative Christians and remove them even from public office. So they want Christians to be stripped of their First Amendment protections. People who are known to advocate, here it comes, here's the things we advocate that they think are so dangerous. Anti-abortion policies. Turn it around and say, no, pro-life policies. Stand up for the institution of marriage, educational freedom, charter schools, parental choice, and defend the nuclear family. Those are the things that are now considered dangerous to the empire by Rep. Sean Casten. So again, that's the milieu. That's the challenge that's going to be coming. And so for those of us who deal with this every day, we're just trying to make sure you're aware of this. But one of the things that I've been starting to struggle with is, I've been very clear that we're not trying to politicize the gospel. We're just trying to make sure that the church has its religious liberty, First Amendment protections to be the church and to proclaim the whole counsel of God. And I just read an article, and I'll post this on our webpage. But it's by Ryan Anderson, and it's an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal. And he said religious liberty isn't enough, and he's right. I've been saying this. I mean, religious liberty is just please let us be. Let us be who we are. And again, I don't know where. As I said before, our side is going to be caricatured, maliciously, I might add. But the reality is, and here, this is a quote from his article. He said, there is a culture war in the United States, and conservatives aren't the aggressors. And when I say conservatives, this mean, Bible-believing people believe that there's a moral truth to the world that everyone is to be called to. It's amazing, though, we're the ones that are called culture warriors. We're the ones that are, called these kind of aggressive names, when in reality, we're not the ones imposing our view on anyone. We didn't impose abortion on demand. Up to even and during birth, we didn't impose that. We didn't force Catholic nuns to pay for abortifacients in their health care. In fact, we were almost forced to do that too in our church. We're not the ones who redefined marriage and then subjugated the ancient, lifelong, physiologically, sociologically, and psychologically unique institution of marriage between a man and a woman. We didn't subjugate that into oblivion. We didn't harass bakers or declare it unlawful discrimination to refuse to put children on puberty-blocking drugs. We didn't do any of that. We're just saying we're not going to let you do that to our people or to our children or to our schools, and especially to our churches. And what Ryan Anderson says is we've got to quit playing just defense, because it won't hold. And the reason why is, he said, if we do not try to convince people why the pro-life view of life is best for all people, if we don't believe that, well, then we're going to lose. And he said, if we don't try to show how marriage and between a man and a woman and how it raises the children, if we don't try to show that that's better than just putting your kids on government programs and no matter what relationship you have, then we're going to lose not only the culture war, but our culture is going to be diminished by these things. And so he said, religious liberty is only part of the story. Yeah, we want to defend that. We've got First Amendment rights, correct. But the other side, who's actually trying to take those rights away, doesn't believe we have the right to speak at all because they believe we're wrong. And so you're going to have to address that. And it's not just going to be part of your cultural challenge. If you're trying to share the gospel, you have to share the law of God first. You got to share the law of God in all of its truth and fury, because until people are brought to repentance, there is no need for the gospel in their hearts and minds. And if you let the culture delegitimate and smear things like honor your father and your mother, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. If you let the culture smear those as hate speech, Jesus doesn't just set those aside. He says not one iota of the law will be removed. He fulfills it in our place. But to those who don't put their trust in Christ, the law is God's word to them. And it's a word that's not just written in the scripture, it's written in our hearts, and it's even written in nature. And so even fighting for the notion that God created us male and female, it's physiologically and scientifically correct, not just biblically true. So he talks about how, when we talk about pro-life, it's more than just the abortion issue. It's about what is life, what does it mean to be human? And you start with this thing that it's profoundly unjust to kill children in the womb, the most vulnerable in our society. Because once you can start to kill the most vulnerable, you can do just about anything. And so, he even talks about issues now with the transgender issues, about how we're just being forced to acknowledge things. And he says conservatives have no choice. Biblical people have no choice but to push back. And he said the whole point is it's more than religious liberty, because children who feel discomfort with their bodies shouldn't be told the lie that they're trapped in the wrong body. Nor should adults be able to pump them full of puberty-blocking drugs and cross hormones when they're so young and at their disposal. So it's unethical medicine. And so again, this is the whole point, is that these issues are being framed, and we've got to get our view out there, because it's really the most just and the most life-affirming view of all. So if we fail to fight back, he said, in the court of public opinion, and allow our beliefs to be smeared as bigoted, we'll ultimately lose all the battles in the court, even in the constitutional courts. And I think he's absolutely right. Senator Hawley is talking about how it's time to stand up against the muzzling of America, that cancel culture is really about power. Now, we talked about this several programs back. Folks, for those of you who are struggling with how to differentiate the secular left's view of, say, justice or social justice and those things, you just got to understand, they don't believe in truth. They don't believe that there's a morality that calls us all to this kind of higher view of life. They don't believe in any of that. So if they don't believe in truth, then what is this thing about justice? See, justice is to conform to the truth, and justice is when the truth is aggrieved, that there's some kind of recompense and there's some kind of redirect so that we can get back in line with justice. That's the biblical understanding of justice. Well, social justice today, practiced by all these secular social justice warriors, has nothing to do with that. Absolutely nothing. It's just merely about, it's the totalitarian power move to make sure that everybody comes out the same, no matter what. And if you look in history and you start to see that, you're going to find out that there's going to be a group of elites who gets whatever they want, and the rest of us get whatever they decide. And that nobody should want to live under that, especially because they're sinful people too. But no one, if you replace the biblical notion of justice, the biblical notion of freedom, mercy, forgiveness, and all those things with this view, you're going to be sadly disappointed and aggrieved when you suddenly see it in action. So That's the milieu. What I wanted to say today, though, is the success of the movement. When we see the success of the uh, pro-life movement, and how it has really transformed this discussion. I mean, I remember back when we were young, when I was a young pastor back in the early or late 80s. I mean, we used to go on these marches and we'd be confronted by screaming crowds of people, and they were vicious and vitriolic, and the reporting was always so slanted, and it looked like we were going to, in the public opinion polls, that, we were going to go down, and then there'd be an occasional person on our side who would do something egregious, but it would always be an anomaly. But they would present it like we're all that way, and all these different kind of things, even though the violence and the vitriol and the name calling and all that never came from us. But it's just amazing how in 2020, faced with the media against us, the courts were against us, the public opinion at the time was against us, because they had only heard one side, one marketed, PR'd side, and then they heard basically the caricature of our side. The Knights of Columbus just released their annual poll on pro-life issues, and listen to what it said. More than 3/4 of Americans, including a majority who identify as pro-choice, want significant restrictions on abortion, because they now know what it is. They now know the moment of viability in the womb. They now know how science has first of all, science defines the human being as a human being from the moment of conception. For those of you who still believe your biology textbooks from when you were young, and you were told that it wasn't a baby until it was born, you're wrong. It's just not correct. Darwin was wrong. There was none of this evolutionary process happening in the womb, and then we suddenly went through the fish stage and the animal stage, and then we became human. That is physiologically, scientifically wrong. And that's why one year the theme for the pro-life march was pro-life is pro-science. Absolutely. And then to find out that when the heart beats so early on in the process, and when basically the baby is formed early on, if you've ever seen an abortion after 20 weeks, they're bringing out baby parts, and they have to reconstruct them before they throw them out in the garbage. And if you've ever seen one of those things, and your heart doesn't break, I'm not sure what, humanity has to break when they see something like that. A human heart has to break. But more than 3/4 want restrictions. 77% of those polled either oppose or strongly oppose using tax dollars to support international abortion, and even for abortion here in America. So why is this, present administration, why are they directing our money, trying to direct our money again to this stuff? Why? I mean, the people don't want it, including pro-choice Democrats. Why are they doing this? Especially if we're calling ourselves to unity again. I think that was just a ruse. But again, I say judge people by their actions. Maybe I'm wrong on this, and maybe we'll see some of these things happen in the future that I go, hey, that's a good thing, and I'll point it out. But when you do something that's already against 3/4 of the American people, both Democrats and Republicans, I don't know how you're a unifying force among us. It sounds to me like you're telling us unity comes only if we conform. So only 19% of Americans support or strongly support funding abortions outside of the U.S. And then even it talks about even those who identify themselves as pro-choice, 6 in 10 say they're opposed to using tax dollars again, and a majority of Americans want either restrictions or want this stuff to be, if it is going to be legal, it's got to be something that is the person's choice, and they got to deal with the consequences of that choice. This idea of actually saying it's no big deal is just false. People don't think that way. They know what this thing is. And if you've ever had an ultrasound, once people see the ultrasound, they can't abort their children, because they see them sucking their thumb, they see them moving in the womb. They know it's a child whose domicile in the mother. It's not like an appendix being taken out. It's another human being. So again, how did this kind of change, with all the stuff that's against us, even now with it always being presented. I read a Times article about how the march was identified. They were always looking for someone to give the wrong soundbite or looking for someone to say something crazy. They never talked to the leaders and asked, why are you doing this? What's your view of these things? They never heard them say that the pro-life movement's more than just abortion. It's about life. It's about the sanctity of life. It's pro-woman. It's pro-science. It's pro-community. It's pro-family. It's all those things, and of course, it's biblical. They never wanted to hear that extensive message. The pro-life movement's about how life at the end of life is treated too. And so when Governor Cuomo talks about, well, those people who died in the nursing home, hey, who cares how they died? They died. Or who cares where they died? Well, you should care because they were also the most vulnerable in this time, and they're the most vulnerable to the COVID-19 thing. And so to put COVID-19 positive people in their midst was almost like putting, a physiological time bomb in their midst. And you should bear some responsibility for that kind of foolishness. And the Trump administration back in those days always talked about isolating those who are most vulnerable. And so again, how we treat those who are at the end of their life. And there's increasing violence towards the elderly in our culture. And again, that kind of stuff, the law, yes, can prevent some of it because it can put really bad people away. But the rest of us got to develop an ethos that says that just shouldn't happen. We should raise our children, raise our families. That just shouldn't happen. We should honor those who are elderly in our midst. That's a pro-life position. So one of the things that we noticed in the pro-life movement is they took on all these challenges. They had to show sociologically why the pro-life movement was best for everyone, not even just for Christians. They had to talk about the psychological things of why it's best. And when women go have that procedure, it is psychologically devastating when they start to realize what actually just happened. And again, that's why, when we talk about even a proper, healthy view of sexuality, it's because it puts people in these vulnerable positions when they don't use the powerful the powerful force, that's the right word, the powerful force of sexuality. Well, some people, I guess, use sex as a weapon. But when you understand the Bible's view of it, if it's the powerful force of sexuality, it's meant to be used properly for the sake of the other, not just for the sake of oneself. Well, when you don't care about that and you treat it like it's just, recreation, well, then you get into these situations where the child becomes an annoyance. And boy, the worst thing you can do at that point is treat the child like it's nothing. And then there's psychological ramifications to that. And we've got to talk about those kind of things and why the pro-life movement is best. And again, pro-life is pro-fathers too. A father who neglects his children, neglects his family. But again, a father can't be replaced either by some government program. So again, all these things are pro-life positions. And then, of course, the physiological realities of the pro-life movement. The pro-life movement has taken that, and I can tell you, women have done a tremendous job of taking the lead on this. Obviously, back in the day, men were told that they didn't have a right to speak about these things. So the women, the conservative women, Christian women, even secular women who are pro-life, they took to this, and they've done a phenomenal job by presenting this as a holistic view of things. And I think that's something we're going to have to take to heart when we get involved in these other issues as well. We're going to have to present not just our religious liberty rights to have our view. We've got to talk about why some of these fundamental moral issues are things that we need to be able to fight for in culture for the sake of the culture as well. So, I have another article that kind of talked about the compassionate mind. It was a review of a book. I can't remember. Yeah, Donald Defner, that's right. It's an LCMS book, so if you want to get it from CPH, you can do that, or you can get it at Amazon, I think. The Compassionate Mind. And then I also, I love Francis Schaeffer, and again, the point is that if you have a Christian worldview, a Christian moral worldview, it is a positive worldview. It still can't save us. just trying to honor the Christian worldview, living the Christian worldview. We're still broken sinners, even though we're doing it. There's even then it calls us to repentance and the good news of the gospel. But it is a worldview that can prevent some of the worst tendencies of sinful humanity. And so I would just tell you, when you read the compassionate mind, I mean, that's a healthy way of saying this is who we are. This is who we are. And Francis Schaeffer was a guy that really, I loved reading him back in college when back in Michigan, when I was there at the University of Michigan in in 78, and then later on at Concordia. And he pointed out, he said the philosophers, even the artists, they're trying to share that this philosophy of secularism is not working. It's breaking us down. And the philosophers were still trying to maintain it. The artists were telling us it was crazy. And so when you look at a Picasso and you see all these crazy pictures of humanity that's broken and things like that, he said it was always amazing when people go look at it and say, look how beautiful this is, when Picasso is trying to tell you how ugly things are where we find ourselves today. So the Christian worldview, it places a tremendous amount of importance on the sanctity of all life, including those with whom we disagree. It places a tremendous amount of importance on the family, because the family is that first place where you learn about what is love, you learn about what is sacrifice, because your parents sacrifice for you, and then they try to raise you in a virtuous way of doing it, and they protect you early on, and then they challenge you to now make your way on your own. And to take the risks that are necessary to live that virtuous life and to create your own family later on too. And so the family is an important building block of society. If family is obliterated, society won't be far behind. And then also the free exercise of religion, the freedom to educate our children according to Christian values. So, when Schaeffer is talking about this in his writings, he talks about the God who is there. When you eliminate God from society, well, all the basic rights of the Bill of Rights go with it. And that just stands to reason, because they were built on the notion that there was a God who created us, and therefore we had inalienable rights. But the Bible's view of that, it's something that even if you're a secularist out there today, you don't realize that secular progressivism or secular pietism is only going to devolve into force. And once you've got force, all of your freedoms go with it. So a world without the sanctity of life will be very quickly a world without compassion. It will also be a world without justice as well. So learn today from the pro-life movement. I think that's kind of the message today, how they have strategically changed the dialogue and now are persuading people. And we're going to run into, again, challenges to that, because kind of the new rising administration is not so much interested in dialogue. It's interested in actually setting aside some opposing views, as we see with some of their early things. But it's a positive message that you have. So carry that life-affirming message to other people and be proud of it, because it's a bonding message. It'll bond you to people, even people with whom you disagree. And then learn to nuance this message. It is pro-person, because people are created in the image of God and they have inalienable rights. It's pro-family, and why that's so important. It's pro-woman. Learn why, because pro-choice is always couched as the pro-woman. No, it's not. It brings all kinds of havoc into women's lives, and it puts all kinds of pressure on women to have a different view of themselves. You can have a holistic view and be pro-life. It's pro-science, it's pro-community, and of course, it's biblical. So whether we like it or not, we're not going to just be able to say, just leave us be. That's Ryan Anderson's article. So religious liberty, while I know it sounds good, and it's probably the most generic thing we can all fight for, that doesn't politicize the gospel, and it doesn't make us political warriors who have to think politics all the time. But we're going to have to do more than that. We're going to have to nuance our message. We're going to have to say this is why pro-life is good for everyone. It's a fundamental teaching for all people. We're going to have to get involved in the gender wars, because the Bible teaches that God created us male and female, and we're going to have to be able to talk about why that's good, even though we're all broken and we all struggle with our masculinity and femininity. We're going to have to talk about the fact that the biblical moral perspective is something that is not ours. It's God's moral ordering of the world, and it calls all people to it, because that's what it means to be a human being. So I always said it this way back in the day: true humanists are the ones who have a holistic view, a moral, biblical, holistic view of what it means to be human. And the Darwinian secularists, or the secular progressives, or the secular pietists that we see today, they can't do that. That's why they call us animals, and we will devolve from there. So their fundamental truth is there is no truth. So if there's no truth, there really is no progress. There really is no justice, no mercy, no peace. There's merely raw power, and totalitarians and tyrants all talk that way. That's not us. Okay, so yeah, I know we're at a moment of prayer and fasting, a time of the stillness before the Lord amidst the chaos of the moment, a time to seek God's face and to open our hearts even more to His Word. We know the difference between God's preserving work. We need to participate in that. We're not to be monks. We're not to leave society. And we know that preserving work is still not His saving work, which we're to always offer as His gift. But we do know that a society that's at war with God's law cannot be at peace with itself. And so, again, I challenge you to rise up to be the calming, clear-headed, courageous voice of His Word in the midst of this all. And so till we see Him face to face, speak the truth in love with humility and grace, be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Until next time, may God richly bless you. I'm Greg Seltz. Have a great week.